Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. It is so good to see you all again. Today we are going to be talking about faith. So I have this one question for you. Does God's word confuse you? I know that sometimes it can confuse me, but have you ever wondered what it means to walk in faith? Or has God ever spoken to you something and it just didn't make sense at the time? I know for a lot of us here who are talking about kingdom marriage and the things that God is planning for us to do in our lives, it's a nice idea, but then the practical side of walking that out can be quite difficult sometimes, and it can be very confusing. Walking in faith, by definition, is confusing. Let me read out the definition for you for faith. It's found in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1, and it says, because faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Therefore, faith is the practical application of hope. Let's just hear that one more time. Faith is the practical walking out of the things that we can only hope for. Things that God might have spoken to us either audibly or through His word or in some other way. And we have to now just trust that that is actually going to happen. Whenever I think of this idea, I always think of Abraham. Abraham, God called him to leave his whole family behind and go to a completely different part of the planet. And God didn't even tell him where exactly he was going. He said, you will go to a land that I will show you. In the future, will. I haven't already shown you, I haven't already told you where. And then once he got there, he was just walking around. He was a bit of a nomad. He didn't actually have his roots set down, but God told him, this whole land is going to belong to you and to all of your descendants. But Abraham never actually saw that occur in his own lifetime. He had to just trust that God was going to do that for him and for his descendants. And then God makes another big claim. Years and years go past. Abraham is now 75 years old and he doesn't have any kids, and his wife is 65. She's never had a child, and he's now just resigned himself to the fate that he's never going to have his own physical, genetic child or heir of his own, at least through Sarah. And he one night has this complaint to God and says, God, what am I supposed to do with all of this wealth you've given me? Because, he followed God in faith. He's been walking around waiting for God's promises to play out, and has been following him and has come to this land and is just walking around and becoming a wealthy guy in the process. God has continued to bless him. But now at this point in his life, he's like, what's the point of this? If I don't have a child to pass it on to, if I don't actually have descendants, why am I amassing all of this wealth? And God speaks to him and says, you will have your own genetic heir that comes from your own body. And so years go past and this is still not happening. About 12 or 14 years later, something like that, Abraham and Sarah have been waiting and waiting and waiting, and things have not changed one bit. The excitement of the promise from God has kind of worn off at this point. And so Sarah decides to take things into her own hands for a minute and suggests to Abraham, hey, look, the way that we kind of fix this problem back in our old country where we came from is that a woman, if she was not able to have a child, she would give her personal maid, her servant, to her husband to be a surrogate mother, okay? And they would make a baby and there would be a child for the husband, and it would be sort of representative that it would be the wife's child, but it wasn't really genetically her child. And so because Abraham and Sarah came from this worldly perspective of this is how we do it back in our own, home, they didn't see really an issue with following through with that. They didn't see an issue with helping God in the way that he was going to provide a son for them. And so they did this thing, but honestly, doing that, it goes against God's laws. It goes against, the union that God created in the Garden of Eden of Adam and Eve, and there being no other parties in that relationship, in that marriage relationship. And so as soon as they brought this third person into the marriage relationship, things started going sour really quick. Even before the 9 months were over and that child was born, there was already a massive amount of emotional strife and pain and abuse, and the servant girl who was now pregnant with this child that she didn't want, it was what her masters wanted. She now felt like she was under so much emotional pressure and physical and probably verbal abuse and all these different types of abuse from Sarah now, that she literally ran away into the desert where she could have died. We're going off on all sorts of different tangents here, but the point I want to make here is that God made a promise. And then these people, they stepped in and they thought that they could help God. But God says later down the track that that was not his plan for them. And he tells Abraham specifically now, you're going to have a child from your own body and it will come through Sarah. God personally came down to have this conversation with Abraham, and they had a meal together, and he said this, and Sarah was in the tent just listening through the curtain, and she laughed. She's like, this is hilarious. I'm like 89, 90 years old. I'm not gonna have a child. Lol, that's hilarious. And God actually knew that she was laughing, and even though she probably snickered to herself quietly or even inwardly, God said, how come your wife is laughing? To Abraham, and Sarah's like, I didn't laugh, I promise. And she knew she was caught out, but a year later, she had a bouncing little baby boy, and it brought her all this joy. But in this whole process, 25 years were passing from the time of the promise that God gave to Abraham that I'm going to give you a child from your own body, and then 25 years of waiting later, that child was finally produced. The only things that Abraham and Sarah had to go on was God's word and the hope and the trust in God. The hope that what God said would come true, and the trust in God's character that he would do what he said. I really want to encourage you. I know a lot of us, myself included, we're all waiting on very particular things that God has actually spoken to us in whatever way that's come, whether through dreams or visions or God's word or impressions, or however God has communicated to each one of us, whether it's about a future kingdom marriage or about a calling in ministry or even about having a child or anything else that God might want to be giving to you and showing his love to you in a very specific and intimate and personal way. There is always a time period between the promise and the fulfillment of that promise. Sometimes it is short and sometimes it is very, very long. In the case of Abraham, it was 25 years for this particular thing. But there are other promises in the Bible that took hundreds of years to be fulfilled, sometimes over 1,000 years in different areas of prophecy that we can see. And so I really want to encourage you to continue to hope, to continue to know and remind yourself of God's character, that he is good and he is not a man that he should lie. And anything that he says is going to happen because he is good and he is God and he is in control. Okay, so continue to have that hope and continue to show your trust in him by having faith, by walking in that direction when things seem crazy and when things don't look like they could ever possibly occur. I really encourage you to have faith today. All right, that is it from me for today. I look forward to seeing you guys again next Friday. Also, I just want to let you know I also have a new TikTok account. If you guys want to go check that out, it's called lindsicaadventurah7. Also, my Instagram account is lindsiabirch.7. It's pretty much the same thing. So if you want to go check out those accounts, they're new. There's not a lot happening on them at the moment, but in this new month of June, if you're watching this as it's coming out, this is in June 2022. I'm actually doing a video every day on TikTok and trying to share it onto Instagram and also here in YouTube Shorts every day for the month of June. So please go and check them out. Make sure you share and like and comment and all those kind of things. It really helps out the algorithms on each of these platforms to know that you guys are engaging in this content, that you like it, and that maybe other people might like it too. So thank you so much for hanging out with me here today. I can't wait to see you again next week. Bye.